Hey Grace family, Stephen here again with another video focusing on spiritual practices this week. I want to thank you so much for joining us and want to tell you thanks so much for all the shares and all the views from last week's video. We saw almost 100 people who from our congregation all over the country who tuned in to check out one of these spiritual practice videos. We're so glad that you were able to do that. And I heard back from so many of you telling me that this was helpful to you, that this was something that brought you life, that calmed your anxiety and helped you kind of see maybe a different way as we go forward together. So thank you so much for being a part of this last week and being a part of this week as well. And we'll continue these spiritual practice videos as long as they're helpful to you. Brian McLaren, in his book, Finding Our Way Again, The Return of the Ancient Practices, says this about spiritual practices. Spiritual practices are about life, about training ourselves to become the kinds of people who have eyes and actually see, who have ears and actually hear. Spiritual practices are ways of becoming awake and staying awake to God. In the book of 1 Kings, chapter 19, verses 11 through 13, Elijah is encountering God at Mount Horeb, and God says this: "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." And there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting the mountains and breaking the rocks into pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, Elijah heard a still, small voice. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Does your world feel like it's filled with overwhelming and earth-rattling noise? It might not be earthquakes, wind, and fire. It might sound more like an overly demanding job, the chaos of being a modern parent, or a calendar that never seems to have enough slots for rest and contemplation. It might sound like homeschooling during a pandemic, or as is the case with me today, this is the fourth try I've made at trying to make this video because there are yard pickup crews coming around our neighborhood picking up debris and limbs. We all have our earthquakes, we all have our rumblings, we all have our great winds and fires. And this is where centering prayer comes in. In order to hear that still, small voice of God, we have to find a way to cut through our modern noise so that we can hear and concentrate more clearly. Now, centering prayer has its origins again, like last week, with the desert fathers and mothers in the 5th century. Remember, these were the men and women who left the city, left the metropolis, left the busyness of life, went out into the desert so they could more clearly have community and more clearly hear the voice of God. The more modern incarnation of centering prayer, actually, the name of it comes from a quote from Thomas Merton. And Thomas Merton is a Trappist monk who was a prolific spiritual writer. And the quote said that spiritual practice should be centered entirely on the presence of God. Another modern father of centering prayer is Father M. Basil Pennington. And he suggests these steps for practicing centering prayer. First, you've got to determine a sacred word or a symbol. And this will be important to help you bring your wandering mind back to center. For me, in centering prayer, my word has always been the word breathe. It's a word that helps me come back to center. And one of the things that's important to remember about centering prayer is that this is not an exercise where we acquire or accumulate knowledge. This isn't an exercise where we go and study the scripture to learn more, to grow deeper in the scripture. This is actually a practice that allows us to actually push other things away and simply be in the presence of God. Father Pennington says, sit comfortably with your eyes closed, relax, and quiet yourself. He says, be in love and faith to God. So you'll gently close your eyes and bring your mind to your sacred word. Imagine and breathe. Take in the stillness, the quietness that's around you. And imagine your symbol, imagine that word as the presence and action of God within you. Your symbol is intended to be the same every time you pray. It helps ground you in the present moment, allowing you to give your undivided, loving, yielded attention to God. You can even choose a name for God or characteristic for God, like love or peace. And then silently, with your eyes closed, recall your sacred word to begin your prayer. As you notice your thoughts, gently return to your sacred word, because what will happen is your mind, after just a few seconds, will become flooded with thoughts, will become flooded with the things that you need to do, that you believe are more important at this moment. Your obligations, the places you're not, the things you're not doing. And every time those words come into your brain, every time those moments come into your brain, gently let them go. Don't judge them harshly. Don't push them out with anger. But gently let them go as you recenter yourself, thinking about your sacred word or sacred symbol. When your prayer period is over, transition slowly from your prayer practice back into your active life. Another modern father of centering or contemplative prayer, Father Keating, writes this: the method consists in letting go of every kind of thought during prayer, even the most devout thoughts. Centering prayer is a method of silent prayer that prepares us to receive the gift of contemplative prayer. Prayer in which we experience God's presence within us, closer than breathing, closer than thinking, closer than consciousness itself. This method of prayer is both a relationship with God and a discipline to foster that relationship. Now, I like to kind of count my time in centering prayer by using simply that, time. Most people who are what you would call experts in centering prayer, or ones who have been practicing it for a long time, really will tell you that they recommend that you practice this 20 minutes twice a day, which, if I'm being honest with you, sounds and is overwhelming at first. The whole principle of centering prayer is to just calm the background noise, to go inside, to be quiet, which is such a rare gift in our world today, to have moments of quiet. Again, it's not an exercise to teach us something new through scripture or through teaching. It's not something that's supposed to expand our knowledge or to acquire more knowledge. It's time to be quiet, to be still, to be calm, and to be fully centered in presence with our God. Remember, go back to Elijah, go back to 1 Kings, and what did it say? It said God was not in all the noise, all the ruckus. God was not in all the earthquakes and the fire and the wind. God was that still, small voice. And centering prayer allows us to listen more closely to that voice. I hope you'll practice that this week. I hope you'll find a calm place, a quiet place. Breathe in deeply, breathe out. Find that sacred word that you can come back to as your thoughts come into your mind. Try this week spending 5 to 10 minutes quietly focusing on being in the presence of God. I hope to hear back from you. I hope you will tell me how this went. And I hope that this video, along with the others, will continue to be a helpful tool as you practice being closer to God. Have a great week.